Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Cardboard Herald. My chance to talk with creative gamers and game creators. And my guest today, returning guest, is the designer of Gloomhaven, Frosthaven, and Gloomhaven RPG. Welcome back to the show, Isaac.
Thanks for having me.
How are you feeling now that you're in the midst of the fulfillment for Frosthaven?
Feeling pretty good. We're trying to get through it as quickly as possible.
It's a tall order.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the reception has been great so far, and I'm happy to finally have the game out in people's hands and people getting to experience it and have all that joy.
Gloomhaven wasn't Cephalophair's initial title, but it certainly was like the breakthrough success, monumental success. But how is Frosthaven's fulfillment comparing logistically with that initial shock of having to organize and distribute all of those copies of Gloomhaven back several years ago now?
Yeah. I mean, I don't remember.
It was a blur.
Right, yeah. I don't remember, I don't have any, terrible memories of... Well, no, I do have some terrible memories of, the initial Gloomhaven fulfillment. But that was because, I was doing it through Amazon, and they, held all the copies because of some, weird mix-up in the classification of the game. And because, anyway, it was a whole thing. But basically, I had to, negotiate with Amazon to actually... send out the games, and it took an extra month, and it was a whole nightmare. That's all coming back to me now. But this is a different situation where it's just we just have 8 times as many games as we did the first time around, and so it's just taken a while. But I mean, I think we found a good fulfillment partner with Where to Go Games, Where to Go, not Where to Go Games. Which is a subsidiary of UPS. So we're just directly sending everything through UPS essentially, and that's been working out really well, at least for the U.S. sales. And it's just a matter of we were a little behind on getting some of the accessories to the fulfillment center on time, just due to various things. And so, but yeah, I think those are finally arriving, so we're able to get out the rest of the games of the U.S. And then our international freight stuff got a little bit delayed, just with onboarding onto Where to Go, because they mainly dealt with the U.S. And so it was, anyway, it's there's a lot to get into, and I don't even have the full story because Price is in charge of that, so I just get his updates and kind of trust him to do his job. So I can't even talk fully about that. But yeah, it's been a huge logistical challenge, and but I think it's going pretty well, all things considered.
Speaking of Price, Cephalophair as a company has grown. You have more employees than certainly when you were first planning out and then kickstarting Gloomhaven. Yeah. What's that like, stepping from the world of being the sole guy who's doing the design and publishing work, and maybe you're contracting other people here and there, but then switching to you're a boss with a big company that you have to think about employees and management and logistics and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly been a change. I mean, at the point at which I had hired Price, I was just fully underwater on a million different things, and so being able to bring him on, back in, I don't even know when that was, 2018, and getting my head above water for the first time was definitely nice. And then the more people we bring on, kind of the more we can offload all this other stuff. I mean, I think we still have some growing to do for sure. We just contracted out a marketing position to Ross and Ross Thompson, and so that's been great, just because we're going to have a lot of work to do leading up to the next crowdfunding project. But yeah, I mean, we still we could still offload some of this work. It's kind of weird because I feel like I'm doing less work now, but then I also I had a kid 8 months ago, and like we're not doing childcare, like we're just
Right.
fully doing that ourselves. And so it's like, yeah, I have more time, but oh, it's all taken up by this kid now. So like I still feel like I'm behind on a lot of stuff.
Well,
But yeah, I think we're headed in a good direction anyway.
well, congratulations on the kid. How's fatherhood going?
It's going great. Yeah, I'm really, really enjoying it. Just watching him, learn things and being able to like teach him how to do stuff. Like today, I just got him to like from a like crawling position, like with a ledge, like got him up to like a standing position. That just
That's
happened
amazing.
this morning, so that was really exciting to see him do that. It's like these small things where it's like, yeah, for anybody else, it would not be at all interesting, but just watching this tiny human like learn to do things for the first time
So
has
is
been
this going to be
super rewarding.
like a God of War situation where all future Gloomhaven titles are going to be somehow about the ups and downs of fatherhood?
We'll see. There might be a
We'll
little
see.
more of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that strikes me the most about Frosthaven, as like an ambition or something that is totally new about it, is how much emphasis there is on the base building aspect. And I want to know, was that around as an idea from the get go, as soon as you were thinking about a sequel for Gloomhaven? And like, what were some of the challenges in developing this whole other like meta section of the Gloomhaven Frosthaven experience?
Yeah, that was certainly like on my mind from the beginning. Yeah, I've always enjoyed that, like in video games, like I don't know, think of like Dark Cloud, that old
Oh yeah, going old
PlayStation
school.
game. Yeah, like that was super interesting, like building up the towns in there. Um, so yeah, I always like consider that like to be like a cool part of an RPG. And so like this being like influenced by so many different RPGs and video games, yeah, I thought that would be a cool element to add to this as well. So um, yeah, ultimately, let's see. I mean, uh, I don't know. It kind of came naturally. I mean, it's not like super in depth like Dark Cloud is, where like you can place them in different locations and like
Yeah.
have different benefits depending on how they're next to each other. Like we couldn't get like that level of detail, but I think for what it is, I think it ended up like executing pretty well. We did some campaign play testing on it, just based on like my initial designs, and the satire team, um, was Alexander, Theo Harris, Joe Holmes, and Zach Cohn, who also did a lot of development work on Jaws of the Lion. So they came back and did a lot of development work on the town. They kind of souped up some of the buildings, like made some of the buildings more interesting, added a lot of story to a lot of the buildings, and so yeah, we kind of took that, did some playtesting. I mean, ultimately, I think it went pretty smoothly.
Mm-hmm.
That whole process, like when we were doing campaign playtesting, we kind of just had to adjust like some of the building costs and things like that. But yeah, I think it worked out pretty well and went pretty smoothly. That
How
design
concerned
process.
were you with like pacing and balance when it came to the buildings? Because there's so many choices of how you can invest your resources. Do I invest them in my character? Do I invest them in the town?
Yeah.
As a player, you don't necessarily know what sorts of things to expect. I mean, at the beginning, it's like you could train some soldiers, but I don't even know really what I'm training them for. But maybe it's going to be something real important, and that's a whole different type of scaling that you got to account for, and different experiences that players would have than just trying to come up with some sort of leveling algorithm for the difficulty of a scenario.
Yeah. So we did try, and there is like some direction to it, right? I mean, because you can only upgrade buildings like to a certain level until like your prosperity increases, you do end up kind of like, it feels open in kind of the order that you can do things, but you are kind of capped on that, so you can only go so far like in the quote unquote like wrong direction. I don't think there is necessarily a wrong direction.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, getting more resources is always good. So like, I think like in the campaign that I'm doing now, the first thing we did was build the lumber yard, or whatever it is, logging camp, whatever the names of these things are. But yeah, I mean, I don't think, I think there's enough direction there, and yeah, there's enough direction there and there's enough like leeway in what's happening, right? So I mean, like, yeah, you're not expected to really have any defense, on maybe the first attack that you come across, especially like if you get the summer attack. I think there's only like 1 or 2 summer events that are attacks, and then you kind of can see the system and then kind of react to it. So it's not like, oh, you made the wrong decision, now everything has gone wrong. It's like, yeah, you can kind of do whatever you want, and then once you see how something works, then you have that space, that freedom, that forgiveness, right, to like kind of react to that and kind of make decisions.
How much of Frosthaven is a response to what you wish you could have done with Gloomhaven? Like maybe you didn't have the resources, or you needed to keep the MSRP low, or you didn't have the design capabilities, or whatever it is at the time. And how much of it is, like gauging the feedback to Gloomhaven, and then kind of reacting to the interests of the audience and the fan base, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So yeah, with Gloomhaven, I mean, I think it's pretty well known that I just like threw everything I could into that box. I would say like the one thing that I kind of cut back on, or not necessarily cut back, but decided like not to include, was like a calendar system. Just because I was like, yeah, that might be too much for like what I'm trying to accomplish, as a person doing all this on my own. So I would say like that's pretty much like the only thing that was in response, like, yeah, I couldn't do this in Gloomhaven and I want to include this in Frosthaven, was the calendar system. And then sort of the base building wasn't necessarily based on feedback. It was just like, yeah, I want to try this in the next game. Like it didn't really work like within the Gloomhaven framework, but for the next game, yeah, I want this to be the focus. So we added that. And then, yeah, pretty much everything else is just, listening to people's feedback on Gloomhaven for the last 3-4 years, and
right.
And yeah, just trying to do things better the second time around.
Well, last time I talked to you was in the very early days of the pandemic. It was March 2020 that I had you on, and at that time, you had both Frosthaven and Jaws of the Lion in development. So how much of the response to Jaws of the Lion went into your trajectory with Frosthaven? Like, did you kind of change your mind about approaches to certain characters, to how you wanted to, have the game look on the table? Like, Jaws of the Lion, at least from an outsider perspective, seemed like it was a surprise hit, or bigger than anticipated.
Yeah. And then that didn't come out right until after the Kickstarter campaign for Frosthaven, right? So I kind of promised everything for Frosthaven, and then it was like 2 or 3 months later, right, that hit the shelves in Target. And so, yeah, I don't think it affected me, but it affected it much. I mean, going back, would we made different decisions if we'd seen like how positive the response was to like the play surface books? It's a difficult question. I know like a lot of people like really love the play service books, and they cut out so much setup time, and you got to weigh that against like this custom content community who wants to like be able to create their own scenarios using the tiles and everything, which is completely hindered by those books, because there's no customization there, or very little customization. So yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, Frosthaven being the sequel to Gloomhaven, I think that was really the feedback we were looking at, is like, how do we make Frosthaven better based on people's feedback to Gloomhaven? And then Jaws of the Lion, is its own thing. And there may be other games like that in the future taking more of that approach, as opposed to like just the big box of stuff approach that we get with Frosthaven and Gloomhaven.
You're jumping ahead, my dude. I have a question written down here. Frosthaven version of Jaws of the Lion. Like, is there an idea that you'll have some more kind of lower barrier to entry titles into the Gloomhaven universe?
Well, yeah. I mean, because Jaws of the Lion did really well, and I think had a great response both from critics and people playing it. I mean, it just makes sense. So I have ideas at this point. This isn't like confirming anything.
We're not getting a hot scoop.
Anything. But yeah, there are ideas. I mean, it'll probably happen. But we'll see.
Frosthaven is a big box, and you stuffed a lot of stuff in there. You were talking about how it's well documented that with Gloomhaven you threw everything that you could at it, and somehow you still had even more to put into Frosthaven. It also has a big MSRP, $250. One, was that intimidating coming to that conclusion of like how much you were going to put that as the price point? And two, like, is there even more that you cut back on, that you left at the cutting room floor in order to skate by it $250 rather than having to be like, oh man, this is going to cost $300 or more?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, yeah, that's a super scary number, right? 250, like, is anybody going to buy this, right? I mean, when Gloomhaven came out and the MSRP was like 140, it's like up to that point, like nothing aside from like Warhammer, like had an MSRP above 100. And so that was scary. And then this is even more scary. It's almost twice the price. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, it's just at the end of the day, like that's what it had to be. So yeah, I mean, to your other question is, yeah, I mean, again, like we took the same approach as Gloomhaven. We just threw everything in there. Didn't really cut anything out. It's just like, obviously, like we made sure everything that we put in was good. But yeah, ultimately, it's just that same approach of doing the biggest thing that makes sense, and just hoping people like enjoy the epicness of it and feel, that price point is justified, which I think it is.
So with Frosthaven, you have a bajillion characters. You have 6 characters right out the gate. And I know that you stuffed as much as you could in the box, but were there any character archetypes or classes that you've had hovering around for a long time that you really wanted to make work, but, conceptually you just didn't nail down, and, maybe they're on the back burner for something in the future, or maybe it's just kind of like a wish that someday you'd see this type of character? Anything like that?
Not really. Yeah, I mean, at this point, yeah, I feel like, yeah, because initially there were only going to be 16 characters, and then we added another one through like the one stretch goal that we had during the Kickstarter project. So I mean, I don't want to say like I'm like out of character ideas at this point, but yeah, I don't have any in my head that are like pounding to be released at this point. I think everything made it into Frosthaven that I wanted. Yeah.
You mentioned the fan custom creation community earlier.
Yeah.
How aware were you of the early days of the Crimson Scales project?
Yeah, not very aware until it kind of became a big thing, where they decided to do a print run and all of that. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty hands off in terms of the custom content community. So, at one point, or for one perspective, right? Like I don't want to necessarily like whatever you want to call it, like cross streams, where like I'm looking at their stuff and then that's like
right.
I end up like stealing it or whatever. Not necessarily stealing it, but like being heavily influenced
having it
in my own creations.
You.
Yeah. So I'd rather just kind of be uninfluenced and kind of do my own stuff. So I kind of try to stay away from it a little bit. But yeah, I mean that ended up being a huge project and very successful, so that was super cool to see.
Yeah, it's kind of incredibly polished as far as a fan output. Like, I don't think I've ever seen anything like that, quite to that degree or scale, for sure, which I guess is a testament to how passionate people are about Gloomhaven and your creations. What are some of the things that, like, you've been shocked by, just like the amount of love and effort that people have put into, you know, their fandom of your creations?
Yeah, there's been things. I mean, obviously Crimson Scales, but then when like people get like tattoos of you know, like their class symbol, or there was one guy who like got like a whole like back tattoo of like it's a locked character, so I won't. But it was like full artwork of one of the characters like on his back. Also, like I was recently messaged by somebody who like named their kid after me. Like they had a son like around the same time I had my son, and named him Isaac. And so that was super flattering too.
Well, I mean, you know, that's you've touched a lot of lives at this point. I imagine there's people who started Gloomhaven campaigns as, you know, just people in a game group and are now married. You know, it's bound to happen. But that's something that you hear about happening all the time in the world of RPGs. So let's talk about this Gloomhaven RPG thing. You posted the announcement recently. Congratulations on getting this thing going. First off, for our bearings, when is the Kickstarter happening for this? Or not even Kickstarter, the crowdfunding for this?
Yeah, we're doing BackerKit crowdfunding, and that is happening in April. We don't have a specific date in April yet, but it will launch in April. Depending on how quickly we can get stuff done. I mean, we're shooting for the beginning of April, but we'll see what happens.
How long have you known that you wanted to do a Gloomhaven RPG?
I feel like we started talking about it, I think it was Gen Con last year, right? Sorry. Yeah, so, and Gen Con happened like later than normal last year, so that was like October, or no, it was September, I think. So yeah, September 2021, I think, is kind of when we first started talking about the idea. Yeah.
And was there ever like a hesitance to moving over to RPGs? Because I would have thought, you know, with how successful Gloomhaven initially was, that would have been a natural turn to something that you'd want to do, even in the early stages. But how do you maintain the aesthetic of Gloomhaven, not just the visual and tonal aesthetic, but the minimization of random elements aesthetic, you know, the design ethos? How do you port that into an RPG experience?
Yeah, it's turned out to be like more difficult than initially anticipated. I think kind of the main thing is that, that's been a bit of a struggle, is just the idea that like Gloomhaven is like this very tight puzzle. You know, it's like you have a scenario, you got your hand of cards, and like it's really designed to like to challenge you, right? And so that like by the end of the scenario, you feel like you're on, you know, that very last card flip is going to determine like whether you succeed or fail. And that's not really like how RPGs work, right? You know, it's more of a free-form thing where, you know, the GM has a lot of control over what's happening. And you know, maybe behind the scenes they're kind of tuning things to give players a challenge. But yeah, like ultimately, like it's very difficult in an RPG setting to like tune encounters to that degree, right? Or if you can, like it puts a lot of pressure on that GM to do it effectively. And so yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we're trying to figure out how to do is kind of just scale back that puzzliness a little bit, just to give the GM like a little more flexibility to kind of, you know, tell interesting stories rather than like always just be like challenging players like to the very end of their abilities. You know, we want to see that sometimes, and when they can pull it off, that's good, but we got to give them the tools to be able to do that. And then also like within that, right, is this very like finely tuned combat mechanism. And then how do we like incorporate role playing into that as well? You know, which again is like in anything that you experience, right? It's more about just sitting around the table and talking, like how to, you know, it's very like loose format. And so like how do we combine that sort of more loose role playing elements of the game to like this tightly tuned combat, without there being like this tonal shift. It's like, okay, we'll get into combat and now we're playing a completely different game, right? So,
right.
Yeah, so it's about kind of like untightening, loosening, I guess, right? Loosening the combat of Gloomhaven to where it is, a little bit more of just like, a role playing experience rather than Gloomhaven combat, and then adding some mechanics to the role playing aspects to kind of make sure that they fit a little better than they did in like our initial testing.
Yeah,
so that's been the main challenge.
Mechanically tethered or something. What you've announced so far is that there's going to be a core book and there's going to be cards. Like the part of the system is that there's going to be cards that you'll utilize, and the cards are an alternative. Instead of dice, you're going to use cards for this, right? Like kind of replace that element.
Yeah, in terms of randomness, I mean, I'm pretty happy with the current Gloomhaven system, and I think it should work pretty well in a role-playing setting as well. So instead of a dice or instead of a die, like a d20 or whatever, you're just going to have your deck of attack modifier cards, and that'll turn into just like modifier cards, cutting out the attacks. So like when you're doing an ability check or whatever, you'll also be flipping over those cards to kind of add a little bit of the random element to it to see if you succeed or fail.
Okay, so me and my friends want to get into Gloomhaven RPG. It's already been released at this point. And I say, okay, well, first thing we're going to need is we're going to need a core book. And then is everyone going to need their own unique deck of cards that they're going to have to purchase separately? Is there going to be like a starter kit that has, modifier decks for the different characters? Like, what's it actually going to look like for the end users?
Sure. It's a bit of an open question right now because we're still figuring out like what SKUs we want to like create, especially leading into the crowdfunding project. That's an important thing to figure out. We're not quite at that stage, but yeah, I mean, I would say like loosely, like what I imagine, is there's a core book, and yeah, so I assume like you and your friends like don't have a copy of Gloomhaven or Frosthaven, right? Because if you did, you could like crib a lot of stuff from that, right? I mean, you could use the monster standees, the maps, and also like the attack modifier decks. But if you didn't have that, you could still, we'd probably have sets of attack modifier decks that you could purchase a la carte. And then it comes down to like character packs, where so each character is like in Gloomhaven is going to have their own deck of cards, and that might come also with some additional attack modifier cards based on perks. And so then whether that's how we're going to be selling those, whether it's individually or like packs of 4 or 18 or whatever, we kind of still need to decide. But yeah, at the end of the day, you need the core book, you need whatever character you're playing, you're going to need a deck of cards for them, and then your attack modifier deck. And you should be good to go with that. There's also additional background cards based on your ancestry, and then also some generic backgrounds. So those will also be ability cards, like the normal character cards that you can kind of customize your ability deck with. And so that will also need to be purchased somehow. Sorry.
No.
Trying to figure out like how all that, or what packages are going to be available. But
totally. Well, sorry. I mean, it's something that early on, right now, you're not committing to, but it's definitely going to impact how it looks for people. So I think any sort of conceptual things that you're working on is interesting nonetheless.
Yeah. So I mean, I think like at the end of the day, one model, right? One model might be right that you have your core book, and then you might just have like individual character packs that have like the character class and then just some ancestry assigned to them. So you might get like like an Orchid Cragheart or something, and so then that might be, I don't want to assign a price to it, but it would probably be like somewhere between like $5 and $10, right? So so maybe each person in your party is going to buy one of those. Right. And they're going to get all the cards that they need to play that character. so that might be one model that we look at.
So with the RPG, who are you targeting with this? Is this primarily Gloomhaven players who, also play RPGs? Is this the people who have like 100 different RPG books on their shelf and this is going to be one campaign that they run one time? Or are you looking at this like, well, Hasbro is really screwing the pooch lately and there's a lot of pissed off people. This could be the platform for like a D&D or a Pathfinder type like hobby unto itself with millions of supplements type of RPG. Like what's your ambitions for this?
I mean, your ambition is always just to like, have it be as successful as possible.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that, I'm very happy that, we're going with our own system rather than, piggybacking off like a D&D system, because that would have completely crashed and burned.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, I mean, so, we're looking to kind of like straddle in the middle, right? We're kind of looking to capture both audiences, right? The people who love Gloomhaven and want to get into RPGs, and people who are into RPGs and maybe want to check out what the Gloomhaven system is all about. And I think, if done well, I think it has the potential to become a big platform that we can grow quite a lot off of. But yeah, we just gotta kind of see how well it does at the end of the day and go from there.
We've seen Gloomhaven and the region surrounding it, and now we've seen Frosthaven and the region surrounding that. Is the RPG going to take us to new lands that go beyond the stretch of those two, or is it probably going to be largely in familiar territories?
Yeah, so one of the exciting things for me about the RPG is kind of the chance to expand the lore of the game. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we really want to give players, the information and the tools to kind of, run whatever campaign they want. I mean, we'll be providing more lore on like Gloomhaven, that'll be like the focus of one of the chapters. But yeah, like there'll be another chapter kind of giving you details on all the other parts of the continent. You'll get like a continental map, and so yeah, you can go, have your campaign down in the Red Desert in the Valrath Nation if you want, or have it in like the capital of White Oak off to the east. And so I'm really excited to kind of expand that lore and give players the freedom to explore the world more.
Is there any part of you that's like, damn it, I know why, but I wish I weren't saddled with the brand name being Gloomhaven, because it centralizes you on one focal point?
I mean, I think initially, I think it's good to kind of give players, a lot of detail on one place, mm-hmm. so that, that's a good place to start your campaign if you want to. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot of discussions about, okay, like, what do we call this? Is this the Gloomhaven role-playing game? I mean, yeah, because we're also giving all these details on these other places, and if it does well, we'll release other source books. There might be like a Frosthaven source book, but at the end of the day, it's still going to be called like the Gloomhaven RPG. I mean, really, that's kind of like one of the big questions of the company in general, right? Is it's like, as we release all these other games, how do we tie it back to Gloomhaven so there's still like that name recognition, right? And so yeah, but yeah, I think focusing on Gloomhaven, at least for this like initial RPG offering, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. Though I'm interested to see like further developments. Is every game going to be called blank Haven? You have Frosthaven, you have Gloomhaven. I mean, surely that becomes parody at some point. You can't just keep on naming them that. How do you feel like you've evolved as a designer? Like when you look back to decisions you might have made with the original Gloomhaven, do you feel like you have like grown or evolved or changed?
Yeah, for sure. And I think you can definitely see that, in Frosthaven. I think Frosthaven is a much more refined product. Not only because we brought on a lot more people to help, but also just because, I think I've been able to refine my designing capabilities over the last few years working on it as well. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting, because like I have other, design projects that I'm working on in the background and kind of like revisiting them every so often, or even like, revisiting like Forge War, my first game, kind of looking at it and being like, yeah, there's so many things I could change about this to make it better is kind of interesting. To like have those sort of, mental exercises and work through them. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, I think my design capabilities have improved a lot, and I hope, to continue capitalizing on that in the future. And also, yeah, I mean, looking at other people's games, like doing playtesting and stuff like that, I feel like been able to like give more informed feedback. I feel like a professional game designer rather than somebody who's just kind of flying by the seat of their pants.
You have a pretty hard science background, your academic background. I could be calling you, Dr. Isaac at this point if I wanted to. And that physics background, maybe on paper, doesn't relate at all to game design and development, but have there ever been moments in which your academic background has either aided you in game design or, given you a different perspective in how you want to present your games?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, so first of all, yeah, I mean, one of the game design projects I have that I'm constantly working on, well, not really constantly, but just like occasionally I'll go back to it. It's been in development for like a long time, but it's like a physics-based game, where, yeah, it's kind of like heavily based on my experience as a physics grad student. So I mean, that's directly influenced by that. But yeah, also like the thing that I like to say is that like playtesting is a lot like running like a physics experiment, where you just kind of, you kind of have this thing that you're trying to do, and you gotta just kind of like do it over and over and over until it works right, and like make iterations and small changes on it until it does work right. So I mean, I think just that like that process of having to do that, for however many years I was working in physics, certainly like helped, kind of me sort of keep that mentality, like going into like playtesting stuff and just iterating on things and, identifying what the problems are and being able to fix them. I think so.
So where do you go from here, Isaac? You have this RPG that's right on the horizon. You're fulfilling Frosthaven, and you have I guess the sky is the limit on what you could do. You could continue working on Gloomhaven projects. You already mentioned possible other entries similar to Jaws of the Lion.
Yeah.
Are you focusing entirely on Gloomhaven and the related projects, or are there other things like Forge War that you want the company to be expanding into, independent of the universe?
Right. Yeah, so I mean, in the short term, very focused on the RPG because that still has a lot of work that needs to be done. But yeah, and then in the back of my mind, and yeah, I mean, I have this other project that I think I've been working on for like over a year now that I'm really excited about, but can't say anything about yet. It's just very slowly like working on it in the background. So like, yeah, there are many ideas, many things I want to do, but yeah, very reticent to like,
commit to anything,
speak publicly about them at this point. So yeah, I would say that the future is looking pretty exciting, and people just have to wait for the future to see what's coming next.
Well, that's good to hear. As far as the RPG, let's end it with like, what is the thing about the RPG that you're most excited for people to see? Because in a lot of ways, I feel like Gloomhaven was kind of a response to what you saw in the dungeon crawl board game marketplace, and you were like, I want to make the game for me. And now the RPG, is on the horizon, and you had to wait to kind of figure out like what actually makes this a meaningful project and not just a thinly veiled pastiche of another RPG. So like, what are you hoping that people are just going to really love about this thing?
I mean, to me, I think one of the main exciting things for me is sort of that deeper like character customization. So where you get to pick like any class and ancestry combination that you want, and by doing so, you have access to like a larger pool of cards, and you can kind of customize, what you want your ability card deck to look like. And I don't know, that's really exciting to me to be able to like more customize your characters, and then just like role playing in the Gloomhaven universe. Like I think the Gloomhaven universe, at least to me, like as a person who created it, is like super exciting and like so very different from just like a standard like D&D Lord of the Rings type fantasy world, and being able to like I don't know, sit down with your friends and like explore it and hang out in it. It's exciting to me.
How much under the surface is there in the world? Like, have you actually thought about, like when you think of fantasy world building, not just what this city is, but what was this city 100 years ago, or what is the culture of this group, or maybe the war that ended up forming these varying factions within it. I mean, we get that surface level stuff, and that's in general what you want in any sort of fantasy or sci-fi storytelling is, like the things that are happening now without weighing people down with all that history. But to make it feel cohesive and well realized, you want the rest of the iceberg under the water. Like, how much of that have you sketched out, and like, how much are we going to be digging into that in the RPG?
I mean, ideally you'll be able to dig into it quite a bit. I mean, I'd say that it's pretty well there, and then we're working on right now like kind of filling in the gaps of the lore and making sure everything is cohesive and makes sense together. That work is definitely been done or being done, to fill in that iceberg and make it cool for people to kind of dive into the lore itself.
Is this where you announce that you've hired George R.R. Martin to come in and fill out the story and everything, or
I don't
Brandon
think
Sanderson?
I could depend on him to write anything at this point, could I?
Yeah, exactly. The winds of Gloomhaven. Well, I think that people are going to be incredibly excited to check out the Gloomhaven RPG now more than ever. Not only was it a cool project to begin with, but you're coming in at a time in which there are a lot of people looking for what's the new RPG for me. And Frosthaven has been so incredible for me to play, and it's great to see people getting their hands on it and having the same response that I've had, that it's just, same great Gloomhaven experience plus like 1,000 other things that elevate it even farther. So I congratulate you on all the success, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of these projects on the horizon. Thanks for coming back onto the show, Isaac.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and had a great time.